Ashoka was one of the first great Buddhist kings. Although he lived 100 years after the Buddha's death, the story begins during the Buddha's time. One day, while with his disciples, the Buddha observed a small boy putting a handful of sand into his alms bowl. The Buddha smiled. Anatta, seeing the Buddha smile, questioned him, for the Buddha does not smile without reason. The Buddha then said, Anatta, I am not smiling without reason. There is cause for the worthy and omniscient one to wear a smile. Anatta, did you see the child putting a handful of sand into my alms bowl? Anatta said in reply, Yes, I did. The world-honored one said again, 100 years after my nirvana, this child will be born into the city of Pataliputra with the name of Ashoka. He shall be a Chakravartin king, ruling over one of the 4 continents, and take delight in believing the right Dharma. He will build 84,000 stupas to enshrine the Buddha's relic bones for the benefit of many people. The Buddha had foretold the destiny of one man who was to transcend the role of emperor to become the most well-known Buddhist. The name of Ashoka would be known throughout many lands. As the Buddha had predicted, Ashoka was born in the city of Pataliputra approximately 304 BC, 100 years after the Buddha had attained nirvana. Not much is recorded until his years of his apprenticeship as a viceroy in outlying provinces of the Mauryan Empire. It was not until his father became ill that Ashoka came back to Pataliputra. In order to obtain the rights to the throne, Ashoka killed all of the rival princes except for his own brother. He had succeeded to the throne in between 274 and 272 BC. However, due to the violence of obtaining the throne, the people resisted him. His coronation took place 4 years later. After 8 years of sitting on the throne, Ashoka decided to wage war against the neighboring kingdom of Kalinga. His goal was to conquer their army and take over rulership of the people and land. He wanted to expand his empire greatly. In 261 BC, Ashoka had defeated the army of Kalinga, yet there were massive casualties on both sides. Seeing the devastation of the battle negatively affected Ashoka. From that point on, Ashoka dropped his brutal nature and took an oath to never wage war again. He further committed to it by taking on non-violent practices and theories of Buddhism. One of the first things that Ashoka did after taking the oath of non-violence was to make pilgrimages to the sacred places of the Buddha. The first place that inspired him was at the spot where the Buddha sat underneath the Bodhi tree. That is where the Buddha had attained enlightenment. He was so enchanted with the scenery that at that point Ashoka vowed to take more pilgrimages, and along the way he was to spread the Buddha's message. Other significant places that he visited was where the Buddha was born, where he preached his first sermon, where the Buddha turned the wheel of Dharma, and where the Buddha entered nirvana. Furthermore, Ashoka built stupas wherever he visited. These monuments were to preserve the relics of the Buddha. The Buddha had foretold the building of 84,000 stupas by Ashoka. This number is significant for a couple of reasons. First of all, according to Ashoka, there were 84,000 dharmas. Furthermore, at that time there were said to be 84,000 atoms in the human body. Either way, it was Ashoka's mission to represent an important aspect of Buddhism, whether it be for the Dharma or for the Buddha himself. When considering the Buddha's description of the accomplishments of Ashoka, it seems more likely that the 84,000 stupas would represent the Buddha's body, since they were to preserve his relics. Nonetheless, Dharma played an important role in Ashoka's life. Dharma was described as morality, piety, and righteousness. Furthermore, the policy of Dharma was the policy of social responsibility. It aimed at building up an attitude of mind in which the social behavior and the behavior of one person towards another was considered of great importance. It seems that by practicing Dharma, Ashoka was making up for all the evil and terrible things that he bestowed upon his fellow man. In a way, he was repenting his sins. Upon acting on Dharma, he found it necessary to help others. Ashoka personally toured his domains, founding cities, aiding monks, ascetics, the poor and elderly. He planted shade trees along frequently traveled roads and established hospitals for both men and animals. Through his acts of charity, he was able to save himself and know the Dharma better. Ashoka found it necessary to tour his empire, but along the way he erected pillars and engraved rocks with the message of Dharma. 42 rocks and pillars were found in what was the Mauryan Empire. 36 monuments were found in India, while there were 2 found in Nepal, as well as Pakistan and Afghanistan. His edicts were placed on these monuments as an ordinance for proper conduct towards other people, as well as how to follow the Buddhist practices. They were proclamations to the public at large. The inscriptions explained his well-known policy of Dharma. Furthermore, they were to warn people of the perils of sin and preach love of neighbor and tolerance. Not all of the pillars were carved with his edicts. However, there were some that had animal stone tops. According to Ashoka, the animals that were chosen represented different parts of the Buddha's life. The elephant was chosen to represent the Buddha's descent onto earth, since his mother had seen a white elephant enter her womb before the Buddha was conceived. The bull represented the Buddha's birth, for he was born during the sign of the Taurus. The horse represented the Buddha's renunciation, given that he left his old life on a horse to pursue the acts of Buddhism. The lion represented the Buddha as a great preacher whose preachings defeated all and silenced all rivals. One of the most famous pillar tops was that of 4 lions facing the 4 cardinal directions. This indicated that the Buddha's message was sent out in all directions. The statue is found on the pillar placed in the area where the Buddha preached his first sermon. One of the great triumphs of Ashoka was administering the Third Buddhist Council in his birth city of Pataliputra. The main purpose was to resolve issues within the Buddhist Sangha, which is the monastic community. The Sangha wanted to preserve the Buddha's teachings so that they would remain pure. However, disagreement came over the Sangha, so that by the time of Ashoka's kingship, the Sangha had been divided into 18 different subsects. Seeing how some of these divisions only existed to obtain the share of Ashoka's generosity and wealth, it became important to weed them out of the Sangha. Not only did they kick out the bad sections of the Sangha, but they also established the final draft of the sacred text called the Pali Canon. The Pali Canon, still well known today, was a code of ethics and conducts for those in the monastic order. In it, 3 baskets, called the discipline basket, sermon basket, and teaching basket, are defined. The discipline basket, known as Vijnana Pitaka, provided 227 rules for monks and 311 rules for nuns on the way that they should have act towards others. It further describes the establishment and development of the Sangha, as well as an account of the life and ministry of the Buddha. The teaching basket, the Abhidharma, provided the philosophy of teachings given by the Buddha. The sermon basket, otherwise known as the Sutta Pitaka, consisted of preachings or sermons given by the Buddha. Following the Pali Canon would lead to a greater understanding of Buddhism, as well as providing knowledge on how to reach nirvana. Towards the end of his life, Ashoka had sent out many Buddhist missionaries in hopes of spreading the Dharma. Ashoka's edicts proclaimed that he had made efforts as far west as Greece and Egypt. However, those missions were without much success. Ashoka had made contributions to the monasteries after his conversion to Buddhism. It was part of his charity work as well as his support for the religion. Furthermore, it was said before he became ill, he was determined to contribute 1,000 millions to further build monasteries, fund education in masses, and build more monuments. He could not complete the task before he became ill. At risk of losing all valuable treasure, Ashoka's son ordered the donations to stop when Ashoka was terminally ill. Ashoka's death came around 232 BC. His successors were not as enthusiastic about Buddhism, which led to a great decline in India. Moreover, approximately 50 years after his death, the Mauryan Empire had collapsed. Not one of the latter emperors of the Mauryan Empire was able to live up to the greatness of Ashoka, for he had transcended beyond that of a ruler. He had become one of the greatest patrons in Buddhist history.